I'm Jonathan Simons, I guess, because chairing this panel is actually personally very passionate. Part of, I think, the future of the foundation that I lead, the Prostate Cancer Foundation, and the interest in the Milken Institute and Faster Cures for what the topic of the panel is about, which is bringing the 21st century of medicine to Americans, veterans. I'm the president and CEO of the Prostate Cancer Foundation. My grandfather is buried at Arlington, served in the Marine Corps in World War I. My father was a junior officer on the USS Saratoga in World War II, and I was the head of Hematology-Oncology at the Atlanta VA when I was the Cancer Center Director at Emory before Michael Milken and the board recruited me to lead the Prostate Cancer Foundation. I want to introduce a very distinguished panelist. To my far right is Matthew Collier. He's the Senior Advisor to the Secretary for Strategic Partnerships for the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Matt Collier is quite a remarkable American citizen. He graduated from West Point. If you want to read more about his biography, I commend it in the program. He actually was Chief of Staff for Representative Dale Kildee of Michigan, became a very young elected mayor of Flint, Michigan.
Before the water problem.
In addition to public service, he's been a very successful entrepreneur with high technology companies. And he was called to serve by the Secretary of the Veterans Administration, Bob McDonald, and he'll talk about that. He holds degrees from West Point and Harvard University, and strategic partnerships are really one of the most important topics of this panel. To my immediate right is Magali Haas. She's the CEO and president of Cohen Veterans Bioscience. This is a whole new effort to take cutting-edge research, particularly in the area of post-traumatic stress and brain diseases. Magali has, for 15 years, been a pharmaceutical executive, and so she really understands a lot of the translation from laboratory to patient. She has a background in biomedical engineering and a PhD and MD PhD in neuroscience. And very specially, she has a whole new model, which she'll be talking about, where partnerships matter in terms of dealing with brain diseases. To my immediate left is Dr. Matthew Rettig. He's the chief of Hematology-Oncology at the Los Angeles VA. He's a professor of medicine and urology. He's on the UCLA faculty. He's 8/8 VA, for those who know what that means, in terms of 100% committed in his academic and clinical efforts for the care of cancer patients at VA, and he's one of the world's leading prostate cancer physician scientists. And he has a very interesting set of observations to make about oncology in the VA and the opportunities really to change the title of this, not just to 21st century medicine in the VA, but precision medicine in the VA for cancer patients. And then to my far left is a strong advisor to the Milken Institute over the years, Mark Simon at Torreya Partners. Mark co-founded Torreya Partners in 2007, and he brings over 20 years of experience actually in biopharma and life sciences investment, and understands research and development very well. Particularly, he was the managing director and head of life sciences investment for Citigroup, and he's actually been an enormous pro bono friend to young biomedical scientists and academic laboratories attempting to find capital as they become inventors. So I want to thank you all on behalf of the Milken Institute for being here. I thought at first what we would do is have Matt Collier talk a little bit about what his job title means. What does it mean to be the head of strategic partnerships for the VA?
I'm trying to figure that out. No, actually, I think the impetus for strategic partnerships at the Department of Veteran Affairs really. Let me talk a little bit about that. I got a call while I was minding my own business here. I live in Thousand Oaks. I live in the Los Angeles metropolitan area here, about 60 miles away from here. And Bob McDonald called and he said, he says, we've got we've got some challenges here. I'd like you to help me out. And he said, you know, Matt, with your background in the public sector as a veteran and as an entrepreneur in the private sector, he says, you've got the right sort of background to help out with partnerships. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, you know, he said, partnerships has almost been a dirty word here at the Department of Veteran Affairs in the past. We literally, he told me, turned down millions of dollars and in-kind services because we just couldn't get it done. And there's really no excuse for that. And he went on to explain that, you know, we have a $169 billion budget at the time that we were talking. And, you know, we have to fight for every dime, you know, from Congress. But he said, we're about, you know, we have 152 medical centers, right? About 900 CBOCs, community-based outpatient clinics. So we're all about healthcare. We're all about cemeteries. We have about 134 of those, right? And we're passed through for benefits for about $75 billion. So, but the moral obligation is more than that. We have mental health issues. We have employment issues. We have homelessness issues. A lot of other issues that we're not statutorily obligated to resolve. So the only way that we can do our jobs for the American people and for the veterans of this country is to partner. We can't spend our way to success, but we can sure partner our way to success. So that was really the logic and the impetus, not only for my being here at the Department of Veteran Affairs, but for the idea of strategic partnerships, the idea that we can't do it alone, and that we look at everything through the lens of the veteran. And those are significant cultural changes with Bob McDonald's leadership that we've implemented.
And just a quick follow-up. Has there ever been anyone in charge of strategic partnerships in the history of the VA?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
So it's, you know, trying to figure it all out. And that's basically when I reported in January 2015, I said, Bob, so where's my staff, you know? He said, well, we got 345,000 employees, go find a few. I said, what about a budget? He says, well, we've got a $169 billion budget, maybe you can go find some money somewhere. But that's literally how it started.
Right.
And he's a great leader, great guy to have on your side. And he's been very, very supportive as far as breaking rules and doing the right thing for veterans as far as strategic partnerships are concerned.
And in a way, it's a startup you're leading.
Yeah, it absolutely is a startup.
Which is a perfect segue. Why don't you talk a little bit about, if we could bring up page 23, slide 23 for a second. Why don't you talk about your foundation and your startup, which is an enormous new partnership for the VA and brain disease.
So I lead Cohen Veterans Bioscience, which is a nonprofit organization. And we've received very generous funding from a hedge fund billionaire philanthropist, Stephen A. Cohen, because what he's seeing is what we're all seeing is this crisis in the veterans population related to mental health. And as you can see by the statistics I'm showing you here, we have over 22 of our heroes killing themselves every day. And a large part of that is related to an undiagnosed PTSD or TBI condition, or an untreated or treatment that is limited in that population. So we can say it's the VA, but it's not just the VA, it's everyone. This society is not handling mental health issues well. We don't know how to treat these disorders. We don't know their mechanisms. And so we need to come together and develop these types of partnerships with the VA, but also with other organizations, the industry providers, the NIH, and others, to address mental health for the entire society. Cohen Veterans Bioscience will be working on this for PTSD and TBI, and happy to partner.
There's an enormous challenge, unmet need, and opportunity in cancer care in the VA. Yeah. Matt Rettig, would you tell us a little bit about the cancer in the VA system?
Absolutely, thanks. Could I have the slide 1, please? So when we're talking about cancer, we're often thinking about precision, personalized medicine, especially in the area of oncology. And I think it's first important to understand what we mean by precision medicine and personalized medicine. I think these are, they overlap, but they are different. So precision medicine I think allows us to precisely characterize the biologic, genetic mutations that, in this case, a particular cancer harbors. And this can include genomics, metabolomics, okay, transcriptomics, all these omics, so very high-level, detailed analysis of tumors. And then the trick is to be able to integrate all this data from these different omics and pick the right therapies for the right patient. And that's what personalized medicine is, as I see it. In order to execute precision and personalized medicine, which is at this time to a large degree experimental, although we do have validated genetic markers for response to treatments, will require really a collaborative, multidisciplinary approach that involves not only clinicians, oncologists, but subject matter expertise, including basic scientists, human geneticists, et cetera. So I think it's important to understand that moving forward to this opportunity for precision and personalized medicine, the VA, there's a lot of opportunities for investment, including partnerships not only with biopharma, but foundations and academic institutions.
If we could bring up just for a second slide 2. Do you want to talk for just a second about how important it is not just to get cancer care right at the VA, but how actually getting cancer care beyond just right, but advancing cancer care is an extraordinary national opportunity for all oncology patients.
Yeah. So first of all, let me just give you a very brief couple of slides on what's going on with clinical care, the quality of clinical care at the VA. And I think there are a lot of misconceptions about how we execute care for our veterans at the VA. So first of all, the VA outperforms the fee-for-service private sector for preventive, acute, and chronic care. It outperforms the private sector in terms of cancer care as well as screening for cancer care. So for example,
I want to just zone in a little bit more on what that, I mean, since the New England Journal, these are the top most analytical journals.
Yep.
What does it mean that the VA is actually superior than American healthcare generally for cancer screening?
Yeah, so as an example, let's take screening colonoscopies and screening for colon cancer, one of the most preventable cancers in the United States if one undergoes screening. So about a little over 80% of veterans over the age of 50 get cancer screening. In comparison, currently in the United States, the general population, it's about 60%. And Katie Couric, whose ex-husband died from colorectal cancer, her motto is 80 by 18, 80% of the general population to be screened by 2018, and the VA has already outperformed that metric. So there are many examples of how we manage patients not only in the arena of oncology, of cancer care, but also across a whole cohort of morbidities, be it diabetes or hypertension or heart disease, et cetera.
Thanks. Mark Simon, you're an analyst as well as a leader. When you started looking at the VA as a health system recently, partly working with the Prostate Cancer Foundation, which we'll talk a little bit about later, what did you see?
Yeah, if you go to slide 16, good question. So I kind of represent the industry side, mostly small biotech, some mid-size, but even some large pharmas. So when you ask them, you know, what's your view of the VA today, they would say, well, it's an insular, it's a closed system. But more importantly, they have a perception that it's really disconnected from the clinical state of the art. And again, as you know, as Matt said, partnerships are everything, and I think this is a really bad misperception. The other thing they say is it lacks really transparency, you know, accountability. You know, how do we work with them? They just say there's major obstacles. But when you push people and you say, hey, they have a treasure trove of data. It's longitudinal, it factors in diet, lifestyle, it's an absolute treasure trove. Their next question is, how do we access it? And as people start thinking about it, and as you push them, they say, hey, this database, if we could work with it, it could be a major driver of precision medicine. So when you put all the comments in context, I think the VA image and messaging can really improve. And the VA, I think, needs to let people know it's not part of the problem of what's going on, it's really part of the solution. And even if you talk to veterans who are biotech CEOs, and I can tell you in my 31 years of making bets on biotech companies, when a veteran is the CEO, there's a better chance of success. That person can make a decision, they have discipline, there's a hierarchy, there's more command. Yes, you can say at times maybe it's a little bureaucratic, but overall, I have noticed that CEOs who come out of the military actually do a better job than CEOs who come out of academia. Even those CEOs have said this organization is sprawling, it's giant, how do we approach it? So I think we'll get into some ideas about how to change the image.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. If we could bring up slide 24, please. We know there are big data opportunities and challenges, and for brain diseases, there are enormous opportunities around the challenges. Do you want to tell us a little bit about reductionism to complex systems modeling in the VA?
Sure.
This is a profoundly interesting area.
So first, I think to come back to how do we get to the next generation in mental health, to be where cancer is today, we need to get to diagnostic tests. We need to get to a fundamental understanding of disease mechanism. And unlike cancer or cardiovascular disease in other areas, the way we describe our diseases today is essentially like saying you have a fever and you don't really understand what's going on underneath. The idea behind this graphic here is that we need to get below that kind of description of disease, this behavioral manifestation of disease, which we call the syndrome, where we describe PTSD by the behaviors that you observe in the clinic. And we need to get to an understanding what's happening underneath that. What are the pathways? What's the molecular biology, the omics that underlies all of this? And it's complicated. So when we talk about pulling all of this big data together, we're talking about bringing together very large data sets longitudinally over time in these patient populations so that we can understand what's happening in the course of their disease. And we need to understand that for trauma, understanding when trauma occurs and what kinds of trauma people are experiencing, and it's lifetime trauma. So we're pulling together very, very large data sets. And the VA has some of the largest longitudinal studies, and if we could get access to those, yes, that can make a tremendous difference, and the issue is access.
So, Matt, when you hear that, well, so Framingham was a great American investment in heart disease. Take a town of 40,000, study, basically statins come from, there's so much happened with Framingham, and it dwarfs, even the data is still coming out, the VA dwarfs in opportunity inside a system with an electronic medical record that's consistent, right? Across the health of the American people, when you in your job as strategic partnership hear this sort of thing, what as a sophisticated former CEO, what are sort of the next steps as you see it, Matt? Just having this big data opportunity for brain diseases in the VA.
Well, let me tell you about one thing we just did last week, as a matter of fact. One of the things that we have at the VA, with, like I mentioned, the 345,000, we're networked throughout the country with our medical centers and our VBA centers. We have a gravitas that we can impact American medicine. In fact, there's a rich tradition of impacting on American medicine. If you look back, we conducted the first liver transplant. Michael DeBakey, who was a heart pioneer, was a VA doctor. The first electronic medical records, the nicotine patch, the shingles vaccine was discovered recently at VA. 70% of all doctors do some training through the VA. So this is not just impactful on veterans and service members, but the VA has a major impact on American medicine. So recently, we undertook this idea of being a convener, of using the reach of the VA to bring in the best and the brightest in terms of brain research scientists, We brought in medical technology folks. We brought in sports innovators. And we brought in clinical care, the latest in clinical caregiver folks and their expertise around the idea of the prevention, diagnosis, treatment, reintegration, rehab for head trauma, especially as it relates to veterans with TBI and PTS. And so as a convener, we figured that, you know, we bring in all these people. We had about 350 people come in last week, including Magali, and representation from a lot of folks around the country, UCLA included. I see Chancellor Block here, as a matter of fact, from UCLA. They were represented as well, but people from all over the United States to put together some ideas and thoughts and be open and be transparent. Now, I can't speak specifically to the data sets that you're interested in. We should look at that offline. But one of the things we're doing, for example, is a study, I'm told the largest longitudinal study when it comes to brain research involving 4,000 cadets at West Point, 4,000 cadets at the Air Force Academy, in conjunction with the NCAA, and we're looking at teaming with the VA. Of course, we have 9 million veterans that are in the system. We have 23 million total. And there's a huge sample size that we can take advantage of to looking at brain trauma, things like CTE. The person, Dr. Ann McKee, who sort of worked with Bennett Amalu on that issue, was the one that really did a lot of pioneering research in CTE. So one idea, for example, is to resolve the CTE issues with biomarkers prior to death, right? So, and this is an embryonic area. So we're trying to open the conversation, we're trying to be more transparent, we're trying to be a convener, and we're trying to continue our rich tradition of improving American medicine, particularly as it relates to head trauma.
In cancer, there's an extraordinary set of challenges but opportunity in the VA for precision oncology, where where knowing the genes and having the drugs can make the difference between remission or death. Why don't you talk a little bit about precision oncology in the VA and what the possibilities might be practically?
Thanks. So could you bring up slide 2? So just the last bullet there, I think precision medical oncology or personalized medical oncology is actually already a reality. Even if you go to an academic institution, a lot of the validated genetic tests that predict for responses to certain treatments in cancer, be it lung cancer or melanoma, are often done at an outside lab. The VA, at least our VA here in Los Angeles, has its own internal molecular pathology lab, and that has a very large panel of assays, and this can be done within the context of the VA. If you go to the next slide, slide 3, please. So I just want to touch upon really quickly some of the facts about the VA. We already heard there's about almost 9 million veterans who are enrolled at the VA and about 40,000 cancer deaths. Importantly, patients have access to oncologic care very rapidly. I personally review the consults, and I know that patients can be seen same day if necessary, or it can be seen within no more than 4 weeks. It's harder for me to see a patient at UCLA than it is at the VA.
Don't say that too loudly.
No, I know there's someone here that might be interested. But, and if you just go to the next slide, please, slide 4. And just to give you...
This is like a money shot slide, actually.
This is really important because it offers opportunity. And where do we target? What disease entities, what cancers do we target for potential opportunity? So in general, as one would expect, the majority of veterans are male, and there's a disproportionate of African Americans at the VA. Importantly, the types of cancer, the spectrum of cancers differs because of those demographic facts. The types of cancers are different than that in the general population, okay? So prostate cancer is the #1, and it represents almost 1/3 of all cancers. And studying prostate cancer at the VA also gives us potential insight into understanding the biology and differences in Caucasians versus African Americans. Breast cancer, which is that little sliver of 0.2%, is obviously uncommon, even though it's one of the big four in the U.S. In general: lung, colorectal, breast, and prostate. So prostate is number one, and lung cancer, of course, is up there. There's a lot of tobacco-related illness, and in the other category, there's a lot of head and neck cancers, which is also a tobacco-related illness. So I would go so far as to say I am a prostate cancer researcher, but prostate cancer is really a great model system to study the application of precision and personalized medicine and partnerships which have already begun with, for example, the Prostate Cancer Foundation offers a real opportunity for these strategic partnerships.
And how much do you think, let's say, lung cancer care and prostate cancer care in the VA is really a representation of cancer care in rural and urban communities in the United States of America? How close do you think the VA really represents American health care for prostate cancer and lung cancer?
Yeah, in many ways, it has outpaced the private sector, especially in terms of the knowledge base and the application of validated biomarkers for response. And this is routine. And with the electronic medical record, there are systems-based processes to allow for oncologists to implement validated genomic biomarkers for the purpose of selecting therapy. So this is going on. It's a standard practice at the VA, and I think it's really cutting edge.
Matthew, I'm just wondering, because I'm sitting over here extremely jealous of the situation you're describing, how did cancer get there? How did you get that kind of investment, that kind of turnaround of the patients? On the mental health side, people are waiting weeks and weeks, and sometimes it's just a completely different situation.
Yeah. So I think what Mark said is you can throw up your hands and say, well, I can't do it. It's the way it is. But if you can identify those individuals who are committed, then it's possible. So in the early 2000s, a molecular pathology lab was developed, was instituted, and there's a molecular pathologist, actually a PhD, who came from Ricardo Della Favera's lab, and he runs the molecular pathology lab. In terms of getting patients in to see a medical oncologist, frankly, that's what I do a few times a week, is I personally go through the consults and I triage them. And if they need to be seen on the same day, they'll be seen on the same day. If it's a routine consult, they'll generally be seen in 2 or 3 weeks. Oftentimes there's a specific date requested by the patient. So it can happen. It just requires buy-in on the ground level.
And this leadership, this really comes back to what military experience can bring, is this leadership in oncology, this leadership in oncology has been a ground-up thing. Is that what you're saying?
To a large extent, I think yes, it does.
How does the VA reward it currently?
Well, they give me a bonus every Christmas. No,
actually, we're sure that's not true.
A cigar.
We're sure they don't give cigars.
Yeah. I think it's not necessarily rewarded for. I think there's an intrinsic reward for doing good. I think it's a moral imperative. It certainly, giving to others makes me feel good. I think that's the best gift you can give to yourself, is to give to someone else.
I'll come back a little bit to incentives in a second, and how foundations can help potentially at least recognition, celebrity, are really powerful forces for good. But Mark, when you take a look at the opportunity in oncology, for precision oncology, at least for these demographics, and then you also look at chronic diseases as well as brain diseases, what do you see as a biotechnology investor, leader, and thought leader?
Good question. If you go to, let's go to slide 14. I think what, again, just from an industry perspective very quickly, and this is true of both cancer but also the chronic diseases, people want to see, at least from the biotech industry perspective, that the decisions that are being made by true KOLs. You've got geneticists.
Key opinion leaders.
Key opinion leaders, exactly. In terms of when therapy is initiated, when it's continued, when it stops, you know, how to leverage all the information. A small biotech company that doesn't have a lot of resources wants to absolutely maximize its, quote, clinical investment. And as the VA can put together multidisciplinary structures or just leverage in terms of the web, a way to bring that expertise in, that allows what I would call the de-risking, so that the smaller biotechs, who, as Mike Milken says, these are the most innovative companies. These are the companies on the clinical edge. Their biggest challenge is accruing patients. Their biggest challenge is breaking open the networks. And one of the things, Jonathan, you and I have discussed is the foundations, for example. They can play a major role, in a sense, breaking this open, so that high-quality patients are going to be given these drugs at the right time.
Quality meaning they're really eligible.
Yes, they're absolutely eligible. I mean, today, for example, if you actually look at all the Americans taking pharmaceutical drugs, I'll bet half of them who take it doesn't work. And I'll bet you that millions of Americans are not getting drugs they should. So the whole system is broken down in terms of who should be getting therapies and people who have the diseases or not. So just to give you one statistic, Amgen, for example, has this drug for PCSK9. 80% of the scripts are turned down right away. So just managed care just says, well, just turn it down, go appeal. So here, this is
a cholesterol
lowering drug
where there's a genetic mechanism.
Exactly. There's a clear pinch point and there's a clear interventional point.
Right.
And yet today the system, not just the VA,
And it's also an expensive medicine.
Yes, it is. And that's the other obvious challenge is the smaller companies are mostly in the biologics area. And these biologics are going to cost tenfold more than the standard of care. So therefore, they have to go to the right patient at the right time with the right monitoring. But the view is the systems are there. They just need to be connected. They have to be networked. As one of the biotech CEOs says, we have to Uberize, this whole network so it's highly efficient.
Well, let's just, could you bring up slide 15 for a second, then we'll come back to.
Sure.
You had some thoughts about the web and telemedicine, where the Veterans Administration actually is superior, without question, in terms of rural health, trying to deliver health care. Take us through just like a fast prescription pad full of prescriptions for partnerships, potentially, to come back to Matt Collier. Take us through some of these interesting ideas. Mark, yeah.
Well, slide 15, actually, the ideas would be on a different slide, but I can talk about the web, what the web could do. So the view is the system is broken down today. It needs to be networked, it needs to be connected. And the view is on the web we can do this with the overriding goal, in a sense, of taking the concept of concierge medicine. In a concierge medicine form, you have one doctor who has access to a great network. The patient pays a lot of money, they come in and they get checked for everything, and that one person manages the care, but they're connected to all of the parts that are needed for that person's chronic diseases or acute diseases. So the goal here is to kind of build this system so that we can deliver this care. And one of the interesting concepts that people talk about is the absenteeism versus the presenteeism, which is in a lot of these drugs, there's a high rate of absences from the business, or presenteeism, people can't function. So the other thing that's broken down is, in terms of the whole system, is we're not measuring, in a sense, patients' quality of life adequately. We're not really measuring positive outcomes. So that's another aspect that we need to build in here if we're going to pay a lot of money for these expensive drugs. They have to deliver this value.
So you're saying there's a health economics aspect opportunity as well for the nation.
Yes.
To Uberize part of how we actually take care of veterans.
And the VA has all the pieces there.
Right.
It's just a question of connecting them.
Right.
And then that information can be applied broadly to the U.S. public health. So in other words, a benefit in the VA actually is a benefit for the American people.
Okay. Could we bring up slide 26 for a second? let's go right back to the brain and partnerships or possibilities of partnerships and solutions. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this and what the prescription pad you would start to write for the leadership of the VA based on your important assignment?
So what I see is that in order for us to move ahead, it really is about bringing all of these great technologies and resources that are out there and available today. You're at a conference where we're going to talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning, omics, but the real issue isn't that the technology isn't available. It isn't that we can't crack this nut. It's that we don't have the soft sciences organized around this. And the soft science is how do we bring all of these partners together to the table in a coordinated fashion. So what we've done is we've piloted a model that we call the Cooperative Alliance model. In this model, a foundation serves as an independent, trusted third party and manages diverse stakeholder interests. That does include intellectual property. It does include data sharing. And what we do is try to orchestrate a common roadmap. Often funding goes out and it goes out and gets distributed without any real top-down management and thinking about what are the gaps that we need to fill. By this mechanism, we actually define together with all the partners what the roadmap would look like, what needs to be filled in, but then you crowdsource the solution by allowing the different partners to contribute where they can contribute best. So it's not a centralized model, it is a distributed model, but it's one that's orchestrated by common thread.
Talk a little bit more about the crowdsourcing ideas. How would that work?
How does that work? Well, there's so many different ways that you can crowdsource science. So first of all, by centralizing data sets, making them integrated and available and open, now you can make those available to the entire community and not just scientists and researchers who do the research within that field, but across fields.
So you're saying, in a way, you could take data from the VA and put it out there so any brain scientist or behavioral scientist or molecular biologist could work on brain injury using the VA as the great asset database, right?
Exactly, and bring new thinking to that data set. I would even go beyond. I'd bring in computational modelers, engineers, people who are thinking completely differently about what might be causing disease, who can take a data-driven approach, and in cardiovascular and cancer people as well, because they're thinking about the molecular pathways, but they've never thought about it in the context of traumatic brain injury or PTSD.
Another example that occurs to me, just as a result of brain trust, Siemens, I want to say Siemens, GE Healthcare, and J&J all do these brain imaging. They have these brain imaging instruments, and they metric their measurements in different ways. So just by getting together, just by convening and starting a conversation, they're actually working together to make the metrics the same, so that if a brain researcher or scientist or doctor is looking at a patient, the metrics are the same from machine to machine. It reminds me of the old days when you used to buy a computer. You know, some of us can remember when you'd buy the software with the computer until, you know, Microsoft came along. So those are subtle things, but they're very important to put us all on the same page.
When you hear that there could be an opportunity like this, Matt, tell us a little bit about the process. And I realize you're running a startup.
Yeah.
You're running a startup. We at the Prostate Cancer Foundation, we always feel like we're running a startup until, tell us.
Well, let me tell you, so from a startup perspective, this is what happened. When I came on board, really there was nothing there, to your point.
We knew
Greenfield, right, yeah. And so what I did was I said, okay, we need a mission statement. So the mission is that we leverage external resources for the betterment of veterans, right? And we're trying to change a culture too while we're doing all this. So the first thought was, well, when I started, there wasn't a day that didn't go by that Walgreens didn't call, or Starbucks, or somebody said, hey, look, we want to help, but we're not quite sure how. Here's an idea that we have. So long story short, we set up a triage system, right? So that was sort of the first pillar. Second pillar was to empower VA employees to engage in partnerships, all 350,000. So we sort of started with an infusion of technology, whether it's a database or internal-facing website or external-facing for partners, those kinds of things. We put together due diligence templates so that when a partner comes in, we can vet those, regardless of what the field happens to be. And then my job, our job as a team, is to find the champion organization within the VA. It's a large organization. There's always subject matter expertise. And then maybe an evangelist within that group. And then we give them cover, including legal cover, and we make it okay to do it. So you're changing the culture as you're moving forward. The third approach, the third pillar, was to be proactive. So not just sit back and wait for the phone to ring, but actually say, okay, these are our mental health needs, these are our research needs, these are our homelessness needs, these are our employment needs. Let's go out and find organizations that can actually help fulfill some of these needs. The fourth area is to sustain, improve, and replicate what we already have, so that the UCLA facility here, the medical center out here in Los Angeles, is the same as it is in Morristown, New Jersey, and so forth. So, and if something's not working, get rid of it. And then the fifth area is this whole idea of high impact projects like Brain Trust, right. Being a convener and bringing right. people together. So it's all about changing a culture, being transparent, being receptive, and when the process starts, when we get a call, I'll give you a funny example. So when I first started, I got a call from the Elks organization. Now, I love the Elks. My brother's an Elk, but when I first heard about this and I talked to them, I sort of picture, Fred Flintstone with the head and all that. But really, this is an organization that does tremendous work in VA hospitals, and I didn't realize that. They have over $1 billion endowment. They have 1,900 facilities. They have 800,000 members. That's a huge opportunity. So we started talking, and long story short, they donated $4 million, or in their process of committing $4 million over 4 years to our homelessness situation. So that's it. It just sort of, the process starts out, and whether it's Walgreens or Elks or Starbucks or whoever it happens to be, it starts with an idea, mm-hmm. and we come together, and then we run with it. And we've done that hundreds of times over the last year and a half.
For these high impact partnerships, like we'll talk about one which could be actually doing N=1 clinical trials, or really learn about, for all Americans with cancer, fundamentally learn from massive benefits of basically investigational drugs, which are safe to test. But when you get what's the triage for high impact partnerships like what you've done now with the brain, which actually has legs, and people, it's not like people just came together, said this is wonderful, and left. There's really a plan of action, right, with this partnership.
Yeah, well, that situation is more, we brought in hundreds of people, right. and we foster an environment conducive. Right.
But now it has leadership, it's got next steps. Right. That was a high impact early
right.
win, which I bet Congress has no idea.
And you have to be a little bit comfortable with ambiguity. You have to let these things run, like our partnership with the Prostate Cancer Foundation. It started with a conversation at breakfast in Malibu, right?
Right.
And you find good people and you match them together with the good ideas, and you allow them to breathe and run, and you help however you can, you support. And I think that's what's different right now about the Department of Veterans Affairs underneath the leadership of Bob McDonald. We're creating situations, we're comfortable with ambiguity, we're becoming more and more transparent, and we're using the gravitas and the expertise of our department to make good things happen. One thing, by the way, I wanted to show was this video. I wonder if we could cue up this video. Well, let me talk a little bit about this for a second. So what you're going to see, one of the partnerships that we have, the implicit partnerships, we have over 1,800 affiliations with academic organizations, which is huge. I mean, you look at the leverage of that. And one of the affiliations is in San Francisco. UCSF, along with our VA Medical Center there, has done tremendous research, and they're really the gold standard for all of our academic affiliations. And one of the areas is the area of deep brain stimulation as it relates to Parkinson's disease.
This is 29.
So I don't know if we have that video.
We do. It should be 29. There you go.
There you go. So watch this. This is a before deep brain stimulation. If you look at his T-shirt, it says Parkinson's sucks. Kind of like that. So it's very difficult to turn, obviously, for an individual. This is a veteran. Now this is after deep brain stimulation. Same guy. If you didn't know better, you'd think it was staged. But that's how remarkable. And this is research headed there by a woman named Dr. Carly Tanner. But that's an example of the kind of thing that we can do, and we are doing at the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Jonathan, that's like, that would be a great thing, for example, if we had a VA day with the biotech industry. In other words, there's such a disconnect between what's reality and the perception that if we invited a whole bunch of biotech CEOs who were innovative and forward-looking.
Let's talk about that,
at the right time.
Yeah, right. Well, let's run with that because the Milken Conference is all about solutions. We have a perception problem that can even happen in a VA hospital.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's some of the, and we also have a perception problem that in our ecosystem, drug companies are just inherently overpricing drugs and are evil. I mean, because we're all in the same ecosystem of trying to end death and the suffering and chronic illness, right? Yeah. So why don't you just run with a high impact idea just for a second, and you can bring up another slide as to what part of the agenda will be. Well, what should CEOs of big pharma and biotech and Matt Collier and his team and some high impact foundations that fund this research anyway, what should the agenda of such a summit look like? Other than to play the video, and then we'll get to extreme responder research.
Yep.
So, yeah. Well, what would the agenda look like?
Well, the agenda has to be that the VA is part of the solution, and that the VA is open for business, and that the VA is a treasure trove. And yes, there have to be firewalls and there has to be security, but if we could show some easy victories, we can get some momentum going here so that more CEOs think about the VA in terms of clinical trials. In the oncology space, a couple of CEOs said to me, they have a view that the only time they ever deal with the VA is via an academic investigator. So it's very indirect. And they said they've always been concerned, because everybody cares about the vets, that without doing a lot of clinical trials at the VA is not at the state of the art. So there's a perception in the biotech community that if the VA is not doing a ton of clinical trials, it's not providing the greatest care to the vets. So they really want to fix this issue. And it's just a question of getting some of those easy victories. And I think with foundations being kind of the driving fork in this, I think a credible foundation can help crack this open. So I think it's just a matter of putting people in the room and kind of connecting the dots here. And I wrote to a whole bunch of biotech CEOs, and one of their questions was, does the VA have a public affairs department?
Yeah. Well,
in other words,
I ask myself the same question sometimes.
No, we understand.
I didn't say that.
Yes, well, we understand because it's not easy. It's not transparent. It is not hidden, but it's not clear how a partner, until your team showed up, could even approach the VA. And even it was word of mouth. It was a cup of coffee, that where we really understood why the VA at San Francisco, the one here, we understood, but the capabilities of these hub VA, these academic VA hospitals that are quite extraordinary, and actually been extraordinary in cardiovascular medicine for a long time.
Another key question they ask is, for example, if there is a victory with a biotech company in the VA, can it be press released? In other words, can you actually get a press release?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I look, we have a small public affairs team, and they work very hard. Part of the issue is that we've become the whipping boy since Phoenix, right, of all the federal agencies. And so there's a little bit of inertia, negative inertia that goes along with it. And then when you look at the fact that we're the largest integrated healthcare system in the country, of course we can use that toward a positive end, right, with the gravitas and all the things we talked about. But the negative side is that when you have that many medical centers and that many situations, you don't have to search real hard to find some errors and some mistakes and things like that. Overall, I think we're improving. I think it's there are a lot of myths associated with the VA that are more pejorative than euphemistic, and we just have to work every day to one of the interesting things we found with our partnerships is that we get a lot of good press through our partners. For whatever reason, the media doesn't necessarily listen. Even if the public affairs group is working real hard and they're flawless in their execution, we don't necessarily get the attention because it's a good news story. On the other hand, if it comes in from the outside, to your point, we do get a lot of good press from our partners through our One example, we did this Google video, and long story short, we used virtual reality headsets to bring veterans to the New York City parade last year. And it's another one of those things where Google came in, they wanted to help, and we kind of did this thing. We did the dance and eventually came together on this video. So we had hundreds of veterans that experienced the parade through virtual reality headsets. They put together a little video, and that video, last time I checked, had over 20 million hits. Wow. I mean, that's Google. We had nothing to do with it. Well, we partnered with them, right. But our public affairs had nothing to do with it. They did it, independent of us.
So one way foundations and people who've signed the Giving Pledge backing these foundations, and people that give generously $25 at the end of the year could impact progress would be to partner on bringing visibility, not just the feel-good stories, but actually here's a model of how healthcare could be improved in our country. Absolutely. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
And do you think that value proposition, if we did more of that, do you think CEOs of biotech and pharma would be more responsive to the real opportunity to create partnerships, we'll get to this in a second, to really create meaningful biomedical research partnerships with the VA directly with, let's say, academically oriented faculty?
Very
do you think
much
they
so.
would?
Yes, that's a slam dunk.
Do they get a halo effect?
Yes, they do.
Do you think they
and
appreciate?
they're public companies, so any.
Yeah. And do you think they would appreciate that?
If
you brought them all together and said, there's a not only a national responsibility and opportunity, but there's a real value proposition as well for moving these forward. You do?
I think they would welcome that instantly.
Okay. Now let's get to extreme responder research and why oncology near term in the VA near term, could really point the way for how to do precision medicine for every human disease, Matt.
Yeah, so with that in mind, can you jump to slide 8, and we'll talk about this idea of extreme responders. So there are these entities of team science groups that have been funded for prostate cancer research. There are 2 of them. There's a team on the West Coast and a team that's on the East Coast, and an international component to the East Coast team as well. And this has been supported by Stand Up to Cancer, the American Association for Cancer Research, and importantly, the Prostate Cancer Foundation. The idea is to bring teams together to study prostate cancer and understand it. And we here in West Los Angeles are the only VA that has participated in this team science program, and we have been able to access patients' material. We biopsy metastatic tumors, which is not a standard of care approach. We've done that at the VA. The material is then sent to an academic partner in a de-identified fashion, so patients' personal health information is not transmitted. That material is then analyzed at an omics level, and we get that information back. There's an integrative integrative computational biologist actually at another academic partnership. And what we've been able to do is identify key signaling pathways that drive prostate cancer, even the most advanced forms of prostate cancer, that would not have been detected using standard genetic approaches. So we're looking at the genes that are expressed, and you can infer what biochemical signals activate them. And what Jonathan was touching upon was how we have actually instituted a clinical trial. It's opening and it's been funded by Prostate Cancer Foundation with a partnership from a drug company that makes a drug that targets this pathway. It happens to be FDA approved for another cancer.
Tell people the cancer.
It's approved for melanoma, so it's the drug that targets the recurring mutation in melanoma. Then it's a very effective drug, a 75 to 80% response rate, and we have tested it in patients. So we have an extreme responder. It's the first patient. Patient had failed 4 or 5 different therapies for advanced prostate cancer, was too sick to get chemotherapy, and this was, I saw him in October of 2014. We were able to get the drug for him, and within 3 months, his PSA hit, which was 120, was now single digits, and a severe anemia had resolved, and he was back to work. He ended up living until earlier this year when he succumbed to a stroke. And this is a patient whose life expectancy, in the absence of this treatment, would have been measured in weeks to months.
Yeah.
So
and we don't know how long we don't know when his remission would have stopped.
Yeah, exactly.
So, anyway, so we're going to get, as they say in the ESPN PTI, to the big finish. But how could you scale this? Here's a high-impact idea. If you had biotech and pharma support, because you need to get the drugs. We know that the Vice President's Cancer Moonshot's very interested in the Prostate Cancer Veterans Administration Precision Oncology plans. But how could you scale this quickly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the key question. I think it's doable, but it needs to be supported both by the VA as well as our partners, Foundation and biopharma partners, to access drugs and access the funding to support clinical trials infrastructure. And
is there one person that you can tell in the VA right now who's responsible and accountable for precision oncology? You're doing it.
Yeah, we're doing it.
But
we do have
you're not doing it at scale. You're not supposed
No.
to.
We have partners that are interested in these clinical trials, both at UCSF, at the
Right.
Durham VA in North Carolina, associated with Duke University. So we can scale this up. We have connections. We talk to each other, and it is possible to do. We would like to have a central.
As my late father would say in his brief naval service, you still don't have an air boss, but you'd like one.
Yeah, exactly. We'd like to have a leader who's a point person for these kinds of
Inside
programs.
the VA.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you could write one prescription right now for the American people or for the VA to accelerate the progress you're starting to make with Cohen Philanthropy, what would it be? What would make things go faster in your partnership with the VA?
It's actually very similar. Having a point of contact, having the ability to navigate quickly through all of the legal IP, data sharing challenges, because otherwise when we do it from the bottom up, we're dealing with
I agree.
Yeah, it's great. That would be great.
We're going to let Matt Collier have the final word, but if you could write a prescription right now for biopharma and the foundations and the VA as a go-forward from what you've heard today, Mark, what would it be?
I think you'd want to have a super streamlined IRB process where there was one contract, the IP was done, the transfer of material. You made it as super simple, in a sense, Uberize it.
Yeah.
Make it so that a small company can access it instantly, and they can conduct these N-of-1 clinical trials. In other words, a
Right.
clinical trial where the focus is on the patient. In a large phase 3 trial, the focus is on the drug.
And doesn't DARPA know how to do those sorts of things?
I do not believe so.
Okay.
I don't know, but I can't speak for them.
Yeah, yeah. But the idea is the same urgency as DARPA, right?
Yes.
When they really get going, is that, again,
And publicize the victories.
Right.
So they get out there.
Right.
People start to see victories.
Right.
You can build momentum. Again, the small biotech companies, their biggest challenge is enrolling high-quality patients and collecting high-quality data.
Right.
If the VA can do that in a rapid way, it would be embraced. And it would help the veterans because they would have access to more experimental therapies.
Right. Matt, first, thank you for your national service several times over, but hearing all this, how would you send us off in terms of?
Well, I think the sky's the limit. We have a huge opportunity here, and all these are great ideas, and they're doable. but they start with a conversation, they start with a dialogue, they start with actually, like you pointed out in the beginning, having somebody who sort of has the responsibility for making sure that it happens. And that's what we've been doing in a lot of other areas as well. So the other part of it is that our culture is becoming more transparent, and we're open to partnerships, which can't be said, you know, in years past. So I think it's the right time. We have the right leadership. We have the right combination here. So it's the only limit is our own creativity and imagination. So it's a great opportunity, is my takeaway.
Thank you. We've got time for, well, what we'll do is we'll take questions, but we'll take them out here. I want to thank Mark Simon and Matt Rettig and Magali, Haas, and Matt Collier, and all of you being here. And we look forward to reporting back great progress in delivering precision medicine, not just great medicine, to our veterans. Thanks.